Sarah and George walked life's path side by side, but their hearts grew further apart with each passing year. Despite raising children together and watching each other's hair turn from dark to silver, bitterness took root between them. Sarah felt he never truly cared for her, while George blamed her for keeping him from what he believed was his true love. Sarah once thought they would spend the rest of their days trapped in this cycle of blame. Then a sudden accident changed everything, giving them both a fresh start and the power to choose different paths. In that moment of rebirth, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. This time around, she would not choose him. Throughout their marriage, George would often say, "If not for you, Sarah, I would have married her instead." Sarah had given him her youth, her children, and decades of managing their home until old age crept into her bones. She believed she had always given more than she received, but years of accusations and distrust had worn away any fondness between them. Now only irritation remained. "George, if you want her so badly, go back and marry her," Sarah snapped one day. "You've talked about it your whole life, but who knows if she would even want you? Do you think I've been happy in this marriage? I can't take it anymore." Like an angry creature backed into a corner, Sarah used sharp words to wound him. Their arguments always followed the same pattern. George would blame her for bringing up old wounds, then challenge her to leave if she was so unhappy. "Whoever stays is the real fool," he would say. Their bitter fights had become routine. The truth was, they had grown to hate each other 20 years ago. They only stayed together for their children and because of the small spark of love they once shared. But their tempers flared whenever they were together, making life unbearable. During one particularly heated argument, Sarah shouted, "Let's go to the divorce office right now, George. This time She never finished her sentence. Lost in their fight, neither noticed the large truck that had lost control and was heading straight for them. There was a terrible crash, and then darkness swallowed Sarah's consciousness. Later, in a strange white space, a gentle sound like a bell broke the silence. A calm voice spoke. "I am the life restart system. I can give you another chance." A message appeared in front of both Sarah and George. It asked a simple question. If you could start over, would you choose each other again? Two options floated below. Yes or no. Sarah and George looked at each other briefly. Without a moment's doubt, they both picked no. "Very well," said the voice. "Your life will restart from the day that shaped your destiny. You'll begin your new path from there. Remember, once made, this choice cannot be taken back. I hope you won't come to regret it." Sarah thought this was just a strange dream, but when she opened her eyes, she really had traveled back to that fateful day. She now understood the truth. George had only asked her out to make Amy jealous at their class reunion. When Sarah fully came to her senses, George was down on one knee in front of her. He held a bunch of flowers and was telling her how much he loved her. Their classmates stood around them, cheering and pushing her to say yes. In her first life, Sarah had been so in love with George. She had happily taken the flowers and said yes without thinking twice. Back then, she believed she was the luckiest girl alive. She had no idea she was stepping into years of sadness. Now she knew the truth. George wasn't confessing because he loved her. He was doing it to hurt Amy. The flowers that Sarah had once treasured were just something he'd grabbed on the way there. She'd tried so hard to dry and preserve them, wanting to keep them forever. After they started dating, Amy left the country in anger and stayed away for 10 years. During that time, George tried to win Amy back, but both were too proud to give in. Only Sarah remained, patiently waiting for George. Then one rainy day, a sad George showed up at her house and proposed. For some reason, she had said yes. After they married, George never mentioned Amy again. Sarah thought he had finally moved on and would learn to love her instead. But she waited 30 years, and it never happened. Now, Staring at George kneeling before her, Sarah saw his eyes become clear with recognition. She knew he had also been given a second chance. Just as he was about to stand up, Sarah spoke first. "I don't want this, George. I don't like you." George's eyes darkened instantly, and anger flashed across his face, but Sarah only felt a wave of relief wash over her. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the room without a backward glance. I didn't care about the confused looks from my classmates or George standing there frozen in shock. None of that mattered anymore. Since childhood, I had dreamed of becoming a painter. I worked so hard for it, getting into my dream school and creating pieces that showed real promise. But after marrying George, I slowly lost myself. For the sake of our family, I gave up my paintbrush and my passion. I can still see my teacher's face when I told her I was quitting art. Her eyes held such disappointment mixed with confusion and regret. I had been her star student, someone she believed in. After I left painting behind, she wouldn't even see me when I tried to visit. "My students may not all become famous artists," she once told me, "but they must never become people who only live for their families. I would rather see you painting on street corners than throwing away your brushes completely." Back then, my heart and eyes were so full of George that I willingly set aside my own dreams. I thought I wouldn't regret it. But years later, staring at empty canvases, I found I no longer had the courage to paint again. That's when the weight of my mistake truly hit me. Now that I had this second chance, I wasn't going to waste it. I hurried back to campus, and just as I expected, my teacher was sitting alone in the art studio. Seeing her familiar figure, looking somewhat lonely, I couldn't stop myself from running over and hugging her tightly. "Teacher, I'm back. I promise I'll never abandon my paintbrush again." She was startled by my sudden embrace. "You silly child. What's wrong? Didn't you go to your class reunion? Did something happen there?" Hearing her kind, familiar voice, tears spilled down my cheeks. "My dear teacher, we haven't seen each other for 20 years. I've just missed you so much." "Oh dear, what a silly girl you are." Though she didn't understand why I was acting this way, seeing me cry, she gently patted my back to comfort me. She didn't ask for explanations, but simply reminded me, as she always had, to focus more on my art. In my previous life, I had been so consumed with George that I never really listened to her advice. My attention was divided, and my painting suffered, causing her great concern. I still remember how her hands shook with anger, her hair already turning gray, as she threw my half-hearted painting to the floor. A painting might lack perfect technique, but it should never lack soul. "This work of yours is nothing but an empty shell," my teacher had once told me. "This time, I'll really listen to you," I promised her now. "I won't make the same mistakes again." After my rebirth, I poured all my energy into painting and stayed far away from George. One day, as my teacher examined my latest work, she commented, "Mary, your painting style has changed dramatically." I understood exactly what she meant. In my youth, my art had been full of innocence, depicting beautiful dreams of the future and the excitement of falling in love. But now, though I looked young on the outside, my heart carried the weight of a difficult life. My artwork no longer showed fantasy, but rather feelings of being trapped and filled with regret. "Teacher, do you think this change is good?" I asked. She studied me for a while with her aging but still wise eyes, then looked back at my painting. Finally, she shook her head gently. "It's missing some life and energy," she said. "I don't know what's happened to you, but as long as you're doing well, everything else will be fine." Her words brought tears to my eyes again. "Those who truly love you will support you through all your changes. They won't make you lose yourself until you become unrecognizable, like George had done to me." I was so grateful for this second chance. It wasn't too late to fix everything. I next saw George when he came back to campus with Amy. She was clearly there to show off. "Teacher Ming," Amy said, You once told me I wouldn't go far as a painter. But now that I've gained some fame, I wanted to come back and visit you." She wore an expensive dress and proudly linked arms with George as they stood before us. My teacher remained calm, hardly acknowledging her presence. I kept myself busy with the tea set, not looking at either of them. Noticing we were ignoring her, Amy pulled George to sit down. "This is a junior student, right?" she said, looking at me. "Please pour us some tea." I frowned and was about to do it when my teacher stopped me. "5 years ago," she said directly to Amy, "I told you that you wouldn't last long in this field. And 5 years later, I still think the same. You don't need to visit me. Just leave. There's no tea for you here." My teacher finally looked up, her eyes filled with clear dislike. "Who do you think you are? Some great master? You're just a regular teacher at this school. One day I'll be famous internationally." Amy jumped to her feet, pointing her finger right at my teacher's face. All her fake elegance vanished as she shouted. She stormed out, her high heels pounding against the floor. George scrambled to grab his things and chase after her, looking completely awkward. The door slammed shut, leaving just my teacher and me in the quiet room. "That young man, have you ever had feelings for him?" my teacher suddenly asked. "How did you know?" I was surprised. I had never mentioned George to her. "I saw him downstairs once. You dropped your paintbrush and rushed down to find him. Back then, he was all you could think about," she explained. "I worried he might be my biggest rival, someone who would take my talented student away and leave you with no desire to paint. But just now, you didn't even look at him, while he kept sneaking glances at you." My teacher had noticed everything. I felt a bit embarrassed and scratched my head. "George still makes me feel uncomfortable," I admitted. "I used to like him, but I think I've moved past it now." Seeing my mood drop, my teacher gently patted my head. "If he makes you unhappy, then leave him behind. There are plenty of men in this world. What's important is learning to love yourself first." "Yes, I need to love myself first," I nodded in agreement. "Don't worry, teacher. Right now, I'm completely focused on my art. I don't have time to think about men." "That's not quite right either," she replied. "Occasionally finding someone to have some fun with can be good for you." Her words surprised me. I had always thought she was very traditional, but her thinking was surprisingly open-minded. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked. "You're so young. Your thoughts shouldn't be so limited." "Teacher, you're just too modern," I laughed. In my past life, I was over 50 years old. In terms of actual experience, we were probably about the same age. But even though I'd lived half a lifetime, I hadn't lived as fully as she had. "I've learned something new from you again," I told her. My life after rebirth became rich and meaningful. Every day, I painted in the studio, joined my teacher at various events, and enjoyed spending time with my classmates. I ate good food, drank good drinks, and truly had fun. Life became brighter in this second chance. In this happy, busy world, I felt my spirit growing younger. The painful memories from my past life began to fade like old photographs left in the sun. Then one day, George showed up looking for me. "I'm with Amy now," he told me, as if I should care. "That's good news. I wish you both the best," I replied. Our talk felt strained. We had shared a lifetime together before, and it felt odd to speak as almost strangers now. After an awkward silence, I got impatient and stood to leave. But George called me back. "About the Azure Art Exhibition, I wanted to ask if you could help Amy again." The word "again" brought back memories of how he had approached me in my past life. "Mary, Amy is very talented," he had said then. "She just needs a chance. She doesn't have a wonderful teacher like yours." Back then, I had been foolish enough to give Amy the opportunity my teacher had worked so hard to secure for me. That decision had ruined my future. How dare he come asking for the same favor again? Without thinking, I threw my cold coffee in his face. It was as cold as my feelings for him had become. "George, what makes you think you can ask me for this?" George closed his eyes, enduring it quietly. "Please calm down, Mary. I know this isn't fair to you, but Amy really needs this chance. Teacher Ming misunderstands her." Before he could finish, I slapped him hard across the face. "Amy's talent means nothing to me," I said. "I don't want any part in whatever is between." I lost myself in painting all night, finishing a piece under the moonlight. As dawn broke across the sky, I was still deep in my creative world. That's when my teacher gently took my hand and spoke softly to comfort me. The painting showed a young girl, but her soul had weathered many storms, just like mine. My teacher studied it carefully. "This painting shows me you've graduated to a new level, but I feel this isn't something you should be creating right now," she told me. I lifted my head with tears in my eyes, looking at my teacher with a weariness that came from years of hardship. She noticed the look in my eyes, and her voice caught slightly. "My dear Mary, what have you been through?" I stared out at the bright spring light and struggled to find words. "Teacher, do you believe in past lives? If I told you I've lived a whole life before, would you believe me?" I held my head in my hands, lost in the pain of mistakes made in my previous life. "I didn't listen to your advice back then. I fell for someone I shouldn't have. I gave up painting, and I gave up myself. After being reborn, I promised to start fresh, but I found I still couldn't escape the shadows of my past." As I shared these strange words with my teacher, I expected her to think I'd lost my mind. Instead, she knelt down, wrapped me in a gentle hug, and spoke softly. "It's okay. I don't really understand these things, but you're back on your path now. You're still by my side, and it's not too late." I looked up at the kind old woman before me, feeling like someone who had been wandering in darkness for years and finally spotted a light. With her encouragement, I slowly calmed down. Looking at the painting that expressed both my lifetimes, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I sent this painting to the Azure Art Exhibition and named it Dream Me. The title meant both a dream and myself. At the exhibition, my work drew many viewers. I continued, "As for calling you senior, though you carry the Harvard Art School title, did you ever seriously attend a class there? You insulted a respected teacher by pointing in her face and spreading lies when she refused to accept you. Someone who disrespects teachers, ignores basic principles, and doesn't take learning seriously isn't worthy of being called senior by any true art student." Amy trembled with anger and raised her hand to slap me, but I caught her wrist, forcing her to bend down in pain. "I once asked my teacher why she refused to accept you when you clearly had talent for painting," I told her. Her answer was that she would never accept someone with impure intentions and unrealistic ambitions. Amy had no strength to fight back. I completely overpowered her both in presence and physical strength. Everyone watching was shocked, and even George took a while to react. "Mary, let's talk calmly. Please let go of Amy first." George tried to grab my hand to make me release her, but I shook him off, causing Amy to fall to the ground like a discarded item. Amy cried out in pain as she hit the floor. George rushed to help her up, but he couldn't stop glancing at me. I found his behavior completely disgusting now. I coldly watched them both on the ground. "And George," I said, "that day at the reunion, everyone knew it was me who..." My peaceful life was interrupted by a mysterious phone call one day. "Hello, are you Miss Mary, the creator of Dream Me?" "Yes, that's me. What can I help you with?" "Our employer is from the Fu family and is the collector who purchased Dream Me. She would like to meet with you. Would that be possible?" The collector who bought my painting? The person who had always kept their identity secret? I had asked my teacher about who would spend so much money on an unknown artist's work, but even she didn't know. I'd contacted many people, even the auction organizers, but was always told that information couldn't be disclosed. Now this person was reaching out to me. For safety reasons, I declined. I'm sorry, but that's not convenient for me right now. 10 million. We'll pay you 10 million just to meet once. This seemed crazy. Though the money was tempting, having lived through 2 lifetimes had taught me caution. I'm sorry, but 30 million. I promise it's just one meeting. Our elderly lady really wants to see you. An elderly lady? Why would she want to meet me so badly? I don't know if it was the huge amount of money or just my curiosity, but I finally agreed right after hanging up. A stretch Lincoln pulled up in front of me. I got in, feeling somewhat dazed. When we arrived at our destination, I was completely stunned. Before me stood an enormous mansion, more grand and luxurious than anything I could have imagined. I could hardly believe that in the expensive heart of City A, such a grand estate still existed. Following the attendant down a long hallway, I was led to an elegant room decorated in classics. She clearly possessed a fortune, yet in both her lives, she had been chained by ideas of love and family, wasting what should have been a brilliant life. Wasn't I the same in my previous life? Even though George had used me, giving up painting and losing myself was ultimately my own choice. Only by learning to love yourself can you avoid such deep regrets. I opened the door that had been closed for so long and pushed Grandma Fu's wheelchair through it. The servants in the mansion looked shocked, as if they'd seen a ghost. I felt confused by their reaction. Don't worry, Grandma Fu told them. I haven't left this room for over 10 years. Thanks to this young lady, I finally untangled the knots in my heart. This old woman can come out and feel the sun again. I wheeled Grandma Fu into the courtyard, where we sat in the sunshine, drank tea, and talked. She asked about my own rebirth story. I found I could now speak about my past life calmly, without pain or sadness. Only a faint sense of emotion remained. What? In another life, he still made you give up your opportunity? Grandma Fu angrily slapped the table, looking exactly like a neighbor hearing juicy gossip. I was about to continue when a figure rushed toward us. A red-haired boy slid down onto Grandma Fu's lap. Oh my, you'll break my old bones! Grandma Fu pretended to be angry as she twisted the boy's ear, but her face was full of smiles. The red-haired boy cried out loudly for help while making cute faces. When Grandma Fu finally released him, he rubbed his red ears and looked at me curiously. Is this the painter of that ruined painting? He asked. What nonsense! How rude! Grandma Fu lightly slapped the back of his head. Sorry to make you laugh, she said to me. This is my little grandson, F. High. His name is Mary, and he's a few years younger than you. Already such an impressive artist. Just look at you doing nothing all day, the old woman scolded her grandson. What's the big deal? It's just a painting, High mumbled, scratching his head under his grandmother's disapproving stare. Seeing her reaction, he quickly changed his tone and greeted me properly. Hello, Mary. My name is F. High. I might not know much about art, but you helped my grandmother leave her room again, so you're my hero. If you ever need anything, just let me know and I'll definitely help. Yes, Mary. This boy has plenty of free time, so feel free to ask him for help with anything, Grandma Fu added. I reached out and shook his hand. His eyes were bright and full of life, a kind of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. He also had much thicker skin than I'd expected. When Grandma Fu tried to send him away so we could continue our conversation privately, he refused to leave and insisted on listening along. With no other choice, my story gained another listener. What the heck? This George is something else, eating from one bowl while eyeing another. What nerve! F. High pulled out a handful of sunflower seeds from somewhere and listened with great interest. Grandma Fu rubbed her forehead helplessly, seeming to wonder if there was something wrong with her family genes that produced such a cheeky grandson. I ended up staying at the mansion for quite a while. At Grandma Fu's warm invitation, I stayed for dinner. Afterward, F. High offered to drive me back to campus. During the ride, F. High kept glancing at me, though he didn't say anything. I pretended not to notice, but inside it felt like a little cat was scratching, uncomfortable in a strange way. Good grief, I thought to myself. I've lived 2 complete lifetimes, I'm old enough to be his grandmother. How can I still feel flustered by him? Are you hot? Your face looks a bit red. Do you want me to turn on the air conditioning? He asked. No, no need. I quickly turned away, covering my face with my hand, hoping to cool down my burning cheeks. It was embarrassing to react this way in front of someone so much younger. He chuckled softly. What is it? I asked. So cute, he said. What did you say? I said you're very cute. Didn't you hear me? Do you know who you're flirting with? I thought to myself. Kid, I could actually be your grandmother. Is this considered flirting? I'm just speaking the truth, he replied innocently. I decided not to pay any more attention to him. I felt a little embarrassed admitting that a guy in his 20s was flirting with me. Thinking about it made me regretful. Having snap. Hai clicked his fingers in front of my face, pulling me back from my wandering thoughts. What are you thinking about, Mary? We've arrived, and you're still sitting in the car. Are you reluctant to leave me? Don't call me Mary. I prefer my full name. We're not that close yet, I said, grabbing my bag and stepping out of the car. To my surprise, he followed me out. Nope, I just want to call you Mary. Mary. He was so annoying that I couldn't help but swat at him with my bag. Just then, another voice called out to me. Mary? Is that really you? George appeared out of nowhere, grabbing my wrist and roughly pulling me behind him. I was furious and struggled to break free. George, let go of me! What are you going crazy for? She said to let go, can't you understand? F. pushed George away and stood protectively in front of me, looking at my reddened wrist with concern. George saw F. protecting me, and his face turned red with anger. Earlier today, Amy showed me a video of you getting into a luxury car. I didn't believe it at first, but it seems you really are doing this kind of thing. What? What did I do? Don't act innocent. Mary, you said you wanted to love yourself, but after leaving me, this is how you love yourself? Sleeping in someone else's bed? Smack! I slapped George across the face, trembling with rage. I picked up my bag and threw it at him, and still not feeling satisfied, I kicked him in the groin. He collapsed to the ground in pain, and I let out a long sigh of relief. F. stood watching George writhing on the ground. He swallowed hard and gave me a thumbs up. My sister Mary is really amazing. I ignored George completely, threw my bag over my shoulder, and walked back to my dorm with my head held high. It wasn't until the next day when I saw a trending post on the school's confession wall that I understood what George had meant. The well-known master's disciple is secretly doing such shameful things. The post included several photos of me getting into luxury cars. The original poster, Wadi de Cha, wrote long paragraphs filled with mostly fabricated stories that deliberately twisted the truth. The comments below were even harder to stomach. I saw that person touching her, and the two were acting very intimate. Studying art is expensive, and those who understand know what's happening. I heard her painting sold for $50 million. Wonder which wealthy benefactor is promoting her. Being young and beautiful must be nice. Just take off your clothes and millions fall into your lap. I heard those rich sponsors are all fat old men with bad breath. F. was like an excited puppy seeking my approval. I rubbed my forehead, feeling helpless. I opened my phone and sure enough, I was trending again. Female college student supported by wealthy benefactor is actually juggling 3 relationships. The post included a photo of F. holding flowers and calling my name, me getting out of his car at night, and the scene of me confronting George. The comments were even worse. This woman is something else. She's leaning on her sugar daddy, playing with a rich air, and still entangled with the campus heartthrob. I'm shocked. How could Harvard Art School have such a person? It's truly disgraceful. Teacher Ming's final student. Ming refused Amy and accepted her instead. What a mistake. What good things did Ming see in her? Ming also lived wildly when she was young. Seeing the rumors spread from me to my teacher, I could no longer stay quiet. Now what are you going to do? I demanded. F. saw I was angry and wilted like a child who had done something wrong. But I controlled my anger and continued collecting evidence. I contacted the administrator of the confession wall, requesting them to remove the post and provide relevant information so I could go to the police. I chose not to suffer in silence, but instead to rationally pursue the most effective solution, reporting it to the authorities. The cost of spreading rumors is too low. A few photos and some malicious words can trigger baseless speculation, while proving your innocence is incredibly difficult. It's better to report it directly to the police, making those who spread rumors pay the price they deserve. This is the simplest and most effective approach. The police quickly tracked down the original poster and several people who were deliberately causing trouble in the comments. I had never seen any of these people before, and their counselor also came to the police station. When we got to the police station, I was very unhappy with the school counselor's attitude. "This is a student matter. There's no need to involve the police," the counselor said. "Just have them delete the post and apologize. Making a big deal won't do you any good, and you won't get any compensation." "I don't need compensation," I replied firmly. "I just want the person who slandered me to receive the punishment they deserve." But I rejected all of it until George came to find me again, his pride completely gone. "Mary, I'm begging you, let Amy go. She just made a mistake in a moment of confusion. If she goes to jail, her life will be ruined." "George, what about my whole life? What should I do about the life you ruined for me in my past life?" "I'm sorry, Mary. It's all my fault. Just let her go," George said, and then with an unexpected thud, he knelt down in front of me. Looking at George humbling himself for Amy, I couldn't help but think of the final moments of my previous life. I sighed deeply. "Get up, George. For the last time. She won't serve 5 years in prison, but she must still be punished as she deserves." George stood up gratefully and quickly left. I stood alone in the cold wind, my heart filled with mixed emotions. F. teased me. "You still have a soft spot for him, huh? You don't understand. At the last moment of his life in my previous existence, he turned the car around and left me, my only chance of survival." After I finished speaking, I realized what I had let slip and felt flustered. "What's the rush? I already knew. My grandmother is reborn too, and the moment I saw you, I knew you were different. And yet, knowing I'm an old woman who has lived 2 lifetimes, you still flirt with me? Then what does it matter? Liking you is just liking you. After all, I met you only after your rebirth, didn't I? Fate is something truly wonderful." My heart raced like a little rabbit was living inside me. I instinctively wanted to escape, but F. laughed lightly behind me, teasing me for being so timid. Because of Amy's situation, George missed the college entrepreneurship competition in this life. He missed meeting his benefactor and remained just an ordinary college student. 5 months later, Amy was released, but because George had nothing to offer her, she quickly left him. As my teacher had predicted, Amy was a vain and ambitious person. She became involved with a wealthy businessman and, just as she once accused me of doing, became his mistress. In the end, she was caught by the businessman's wife. Her face was scratched badly, and she was forced to leave the country, disappearing without a trace. George lost the love he had worked so hard to obtain and spent his day. He would look at the glamorous and famous painter Amy, and then at Mary, who revolved around their family all day and had achieved nothing. His heart increasingly leaned toward Amy. He often thought how much better it would have been if he had married Amy back then. He never thought he'd get another chance to choose differently, but unexpectedly, an accident gave them both a rebirth. At the moment the car came crashing toward them, I closed my eyes as the voice faded. In this new life, I had found my passion again. I had become the artist I was meant to be. I had found people who truly valued me, my teacher, Grandma Fu, and even the playful but sincere F. The weight of my past life with George no longer held me down. I had learned to love myself first, to pursue my dreams, and to recognize true support when it appeared. George had chosen his path twice, and twice he had found himself empty-handed, chasing after what he couldn't have while neglecting what was right before him. As for me, I had finally broken free from that cycle. My studio was flourishing, my art was speaking to people's hearts, and my future stretched bright before me. Some people spend their lives looking backward, regretting choices made or paths not taken. Others learn to embrace the present and build something beautiful from it. In my second chance at life, I had chosen to be the latter. This time, I had chosen myself, and I had no regrets.